which immediately put violent felons back on the streets, handcuffing police, and putting our communities in danger. And we hear this over and over again. I was listening to my colleagues even over the weekend, and even as early as this morning, colleagues from across the aisle complaining that shootings are up and crime is up. Why do you think that is? We also had discovery reform, which lets criminals revisit the scene of their crime, putting victims in fear, in anguish. It stresses the family that these individuals who were had so much gumption to come forward and perform this crime, and now they're able to go back and visit the crime. This also puts prosecutors in a difficult position because they have no control over the situation. We saw the repeal of 50A, which opened up first responders' personnel files available to anyone for any reason. 50A is a civil rights law that was put in place in the 1970s because so many false or unsubstantiated accusations were put in. That means victims were not having their day in court. We now have a bill that would guarantee parole hearings for anyone that reaches 55 years old and has served 15 years of their sentence, regardless of the crime and regardless of the prison sentence. We have a system in place that not only has a judge, but has a jury of your peers who then listens to the crime and decides what the punishment should be. And now apparently we're throwing that aside. Could walk the streets again at 55, having decades of life to live, decades more than the lives they took when they committed their crime. Some criminals' acts are so heinous, a judge and a jury decided they should never leave prison for their crimes. Take, for example, Colin Ferguson. This was a crime that was committed on Long Island, near my district, where Colin Ferguson boarded a Long Island Railroad train in 1993 and indiscriminately started shooting. He killed 6 people and injured 19 people. After showing no remorse at his trial, he was ultimately convicted of 6 counts of murder and 19 counts of attempted murder and was sentenced to 315 years in prison. That means a judge and a jury agreed that his crime was so heinous he should never see the light of day. In fact, the judge said Colin Ferguson will never return to society and will spend the rest of his natural life in prison. That's how strongly they felt. This new rule would now allow him to walk free, and he's nearly 80 years old. Allowing this bill to become law is a grave injustice to the family and friends of those lost in 1993 and all victims. We need to restore common sense to the state, and we need to start, and that starts by never letting this bill see the light of day. We need to stand up for victims, people who went about their day doing what they're supposed to be doing and found themselves a victim of a crime and lost their lives or had some kind of heinous act against them that they didn't ask for, and they have fewer rights than criminals do. This bill just should not come about. Leader?
To all of us, regardless of where we are from, whether we're from the North Country or the Southern Tier where Senator O'Mara and I are from, or from Niagara Falls where the leader is. It is time that we put hardworking, honest New Yorkers before hardened criminals. And the sad reality is that this parole board, if you look at least during my tenure here, they're less interested in putting the safety of New Yorkers first They're less interested in that, and they base all of their decisions on the way that the political winds are blowing. That should be unacceptable to every single New Yorker. Senator Wyke mentioned all of the bloodshed, all of the shootings, all of the crime that is happening in cities across this great state. There is blood being spilled throughout those cities. That blood is on the hands of the majorities of both houses of the legislature, and it's on the hands of the parole board, who continues to release these hardened, repugnant criminals back out onto the street. Let me tell you where that blood isn't. It isn't on the hands of the members of this conference, because we continually stand up for victims. We put victims first. We put hardworking New Yorkers first. That's where our priorities always have been, and there is no doubt in my mind, under the leadership of Senator Ort, that's where our priorities will remain. Thank you.
Contrast to what they want to do. And just to recap, so you're all familiar with, of course, the Clean Slate Bill, which erases, expunges the records of even violent criminals, of money launderers. It would make it impossible to know who you're hiring, to know what someone's background is. You're all familiar with the elder parole, which of course makes someone automatically at 55, and you've already had to serve 15 years. So I got news for you. You can ask any prosecutor out there, if you're over 55 and you've been in jail for longer than 15 years, you're there for something quite serious. We're talking about B felonies or more. And as Senator Wyke outlined, a judge, this isn't like a, you've heard this comment about someone shouldn't be judged by the worst moment in their life. And conceptually, I agree with that. But we're not talking about that. We're not talking about like a Google search that came up, something embarrassing you did in college, and it's going to impact your job search. These are people who killed people. You know what the worst moment of their victims' lives were? That day. The families, that's the worst day in their life. And it will be for the rest of their lives. There's no reprieve from that. The only justice we can offer those families is to keep these people locked up for the length of their prison sentence. Again, they were sentenced by a jury of their peers and a judge, convicted by a jury of their peers and sentenced by a judge. And then last is the fair parole, sponsored by Senator Rivera, which essentially means you have to prove this person will be a threat, otherwise they have to be paroled. I mean, it's very obvious what we're trying to do. It's very obvious this is not about reform. This is a continuing overturning of the system. And not only is it certainly anti-police, anti-law enforcement, I'm going to argue that it is absolutely anathema and anti-public safety. If you're wondering why there's an increase in crime, it's because public safety, this isn't about public safety. Public safety be damned. We're trying to achieve and make happy the furthest of the furthest left, regardless of anything else. We know crime is a problem, yet the Democrats who run state government can't do what they need to do about it because they're terrified of those on the far left. That's why this is happening, and our package, really, which is common sense, we're talking about allowing victims to record their statements, to make sure that those impact statements are considered by the board, by people who make the determination to release someone. A unanimous vote to let a convicted killer back into society. These, a couple years ago, would not have been that radical, and yet here we are today proposing them as common sense solutions. And I'll guarantee you, and I know I have, and I'm sure many of my colleagues have, I have received phone calls from constituents who have been victimized by someone who is currently in prison. Their loved one is no longer here, and they're concerned for their own safety if this individual is released back into society. I'll tell you what, when I speak to those folks, when I speak to that one who's outraged and terrified and abhorred that this is even being considered, I'm much more concerned with solving her problem and advocating for her than I am Mark David Chapman or Richard Rivera or Son of Sam. I'm not concerned with their problem. My colleagues across the aisle seem to be laser focused on solving their problem. This conference is laser focused on standing up for victims and for public safety. And with that, I'll certainly take any questions. Mm-hmm. When they turn 55, Bill, they'd automatically have to be considered for parole. So yes, some of these folks have been eligible and they've been turned down, thankfully. But the point is, all of these folks and people like them would automatically be considered for parole at the age of 55. I don't think the fact that you're 55 should make you eligible automatically to be released. I think what you did and the crime and the amount of time you served and your behavior should go into whether you're considered for parole. But the fact that you reach a certain age and that you vote right. I think there needs to be, I think the Democrats are certainly hoping that the public does not understand the linkage between the reforms that have happened and the direct increase in crime. It is my job to make sure that the public does understand that linkage, because it is real. That linkage is not a political talking point. Since these reforms have been put in place, crime has increased, period, end of story. Violent crime has increased. Now, I'm sure the governor and others would love for you to think that they're going to be the person coming to the fire to put it out. The problem is they're coming with a can of gas and not a can of water. So these policies, and more like it, simply are going to continue what I see as an increase in crime and less public safety, and again, an increase in violent crime. That's what I think we're really focused on today, and I think each and every day when we talk about increase in shootings, increase in muggings, increase in murders. So I am sure they would love for people not to make the connection, but it is I believe my duty and my colleagues' duty to make sure that people understand why this increase has occurred. It's just like we talk about why do people leave New York State, and we talk about the policies that are passed here in the state capitol that have real life impacts. The same is true when we talk about bail reform, discovery reform, repeal of 50A, and I think just the overall tenor and rhetoric from my colleagues across the aisle.
Do you have evidence of the linkage, though? Some of the other reasons that people say might be the gun laws,
You know, Karen, gun laws weren't changed. And I'll tell you what, I'm not going to respond to more violent offenders on the streets by taking away legal gun owners' ability to own guns. That's like disarming people while you're letting out more violent offenders from jail. And that is an actual thing that's happening. So you can just look at 2019, when the laws were passed, and look at the crime rates since 2019.
you think that's the only explanation?
I think that's a very big part of the explanation. I can only speak to here in New York, Bill. I don't follow crime rates in Illinois or California, but I can tell you here in New York, if you're going to try to spin a web that we let out violent offenders with no bail, we're letting out cop killers, we're creating a rhetoric, and the rhetoric, to your point about across the country, maybe that's why, because the rhetoric against police and the rhetoric against law enforcement and public safety, that's been nationwide. Led right here in New York, but that's been nationwide. that it's okay to attack police officers, that they're all racist, that it's all corrupt. And the only way to get it is to overturn it. Well, this conference stands against such rhetoric and such policies. But I can tell you here in the state of New York, there's little to tell me that all the things that my conference, I remember Senator Akshar, Senator Lanza debating some of these bills on the floor and they were passed, and everything they said would happen has started to happen.
You know, a big area of crime that's increased over the past few years has been shootings, as you mentioned, and obviously the big problem is illegal guns that are on the street. Does the conference have any position on how the state can move to get rid of illegal gun trafficking and illegal guns? Democrats have press conference today, one idea was to make gun manufacturers liable for.
Oh, my goodness.
You know, Dan, I can tell you this. Our conference has always been against illegal guns. I don't know anyone that I've met that's for illegal guns. I haven't met an elected official yet. We are against illegal guns, and in fact, they're illegal because there are currently laws that make them so. So obviously enforcement is important, but the idea that you're going to hold gun manufacturers responsible for the acts of people, especially if they're already committing a crime by possessing an illegal weapon, I don't see how that changes anything. Criminals, the very people we're here talking about today, that we want to help, we need to solve their problem, they, by definition, don't follow laws. That's why they're criminals. I think, yes, I would certainly advocate for stronger law enforcement. I don't think anyone out there is for more legal guns on the street, certainly in the hands of people who would do harm. But I also think it's important that the rhetoric and the policies we're adopting get back to some sort of balance and common sense. I've seen poll after poll, whether it's inner city communities, rural communities, ethnic minorities, white communities, they will tell you they want to see their police presence maintained or improved. Do they want to trust the cops? Do they want to? Yes, those are all socio-cultural things that we need to work on. But nobody wants to see less law enforcement, less enforcement of laws, less bad people going to jail. And very often, these people who are released time and again re-victimize the same communities, the same folks over and over again. And there's no discussion about the victims. There's no talk about what this means for the victims to talk about some of the package of reforms that they're proposing.
Senator, especially curious about, you talked about that some of these criminals have done such serious crimes that 15 years isn't long enough to change. What amount of time is long enough? Does that mean programs aren't working, that they're supposed to, because I believe under those laws, you have to have people involved in educational or other reform programs in prison. So do they need to be amended? What length of time is appropriate?
So I don't know that, I think the premise of your question, I would push back on a little bit, the idea of I'm not interested in rehabilitating the son of Sam. I'm just not. That's not about rehabilitation. He's in jail. Colin Ferguson is in jail for the rest of their life. They can be rehabilitated in the next life. So that's the first thing I would say about some of these folks. Now, are there programs that can happen that happen in jails that we can do a better job at rehabilitating? I'm sure we could, and I would love to see a focus or have a package or something working on that. Whether it's at getting, preparing people to enter civil society again when they are released. But what we're talking about is what they want to do is make 55. I don't know what triggers at 55 that suddenly makes you eligible. It's called elder parole for a reason. They just think, well, this person's getting up in age and they deserve a chance to get out of jail. I mean, what is 55? I would love to know what the age of 55 means to trigger them. So that's what I would kind of push back on. What makes that metric so important to get them out? But I think the other important piece there is I do believe in redemption and rehabilitation. I believe my colleagues behind me do. But as usual, and I'll say for the past 3 years, if we were talking about very specific crimes, non-violent crimes, first offender type crimes, I think I can't speak for all of them, I can speak for myself, that's something that I could consider But we're not talking about that. We're talking about all crimes. The clean slate. Almost every crime, except for certain very specific ones, to include murder. You know, so we're talking about, it's not just enough to make incremental, and I would argue more specific and targeted reforms. It's about being as progressive or as left as you can be. It's about the headline. And that's something that I feel very strongly about. You always hear we got to lead the nation, be the most progressive. Well, I don't think it's good when you're leading the nation in out-migration, when you're leading the nation in crime, when you're leading the nation on these kinds of policies. I think it's actually bad. It puts New Yorkers in a more dangerous position. It puts our law enforcement in a more dangerous position. And I don't think it's the path to a better tomorrow for this state. At the cost of someone else's life? I can tell you that argument isn't going to ring real great with people out there.